Okay, I remember to bring my glasses this time. Yesterday I couldn't see the screen. So it's already been mentioned a bit about who I am, but I suppose I'll give you a bit of a background. I'm a CMT X-linked type 1 patient. You may still hear a faint resemblance of an Irish accent. I'm originally from Ireland, and growing up, there was no CMT patient organisation, so I never had anything like this that you have here. And there was also no ongoing CMT focused research in Ireland. And when you go in to get diagnosed and you hear there's no treatment, there's no cure, there's no organisation to follow up and look after you, you're really in the dark. And for me, CMT represents so much uncertainty about who you're going to be, what life holds for you, and what life holds for your loved ones and your family members. And it's so variable across patients and even within the same family. So in my family, I have a cousin who's the same age as me, and he's far more severely affected than I am. And my mother, who's a female X-linked patient, she was wheelchair bound at 50, and that's quite rare to hear for a CMT X-linked patient, because females are meant to be slightly mildly more affected. But CMT absolutely crippled her physically and mentally, and earlier this year she actually died of complications due to being in a wheelchair. So CMT really represents uncertainty for patients and for loved ones of patients. And I really wanted to unravel that uncertainty, to unmask, to try and clarify things. And so I wanted to become a CMT researcher, and I decided that quite early on in life. And there's a lot of people in the room who was reading their papers at 16. This is true. sending crazy emails, which I'm glad none of them remember. But for me, like I said, there's no CMT research in Ireland, so I trained in general science background and regenerative medicine. I really had to move to where I could see the action happening. And at that time, back around 2015, there'd been some big papers that came out of Belgium. So I decided to pack up and move to Belgium, to move to where the action is. And there was a discovery in this handsome man's lab, Ludo van den Bos. It was discovery that HX6 inhibitors could reverse certain phenotypes in CMT type 2. And I really wanted to get involved in this. So I moved to Belgium, had the funnest time during my PhD. But then what was nice is that the research translated to a company being set up, Augustine Therapeutics, which are now translating novel HX6 inhibitors for the treatment of CMT. So for a patient, this is everything that you want. You move, you put your mind to it, and something comes out of it at the end. But it's not always the case for patients. Like, this is me in research, but you're here at a conference where patients have set it up, patients have raised money, patients have put money to good use. So, as you heard from Bruce, I'm very happy that he went into detail and discussed a lot of the history about CMT, because it saved me. But the progress in CMT research has been really slow. And this is just an overview of academic publications published on CMT. And what you can see is, well, I'll tell you, most of it was clinical observations. Patients come in and it's reporting on the symptoms of patients. But we didn't know anything about the genes that were involved. And this was mentioned also by Bruce. But there was an inflection point for CMT research It just so happens to be 1991 when I was born, but it's nothing to do with me. It's actually to do with the discovery of PMP22 causing duplication, causing the main form of CMT, CMT type 1A. But what preceded this was a lot of technological advancement. And from 1991, there was a burst in CMT research. And as that was already mentioned, over 100 genes have been identified as disease causing in CMT. But why it's very important to identify the genes is because then you can understand the pathways that cause these mutations and whether there's similarities, and only then can you really target therapies. So as I said, most of the research, or most of the early work on CMT was clinical observations on patients, and then you try and understand genetics, what's causing these symptoms, and then you can understand the cellular pathways involved in these affected genes, and only then can you try to identify targets. And Bruce mentioned SORD, the mutations in SORD, and how fast the discovery from the genetics to the identification of therapies, how fast that happened. And that's once all the technology is there in place and you can utilize it, things can go fast. But that wasn't always the case for CMT. So, as I said, CMT 1A was really unraveled the mystery in 1991, but there was really slow progress for anything to happen in the CMT field in terms of interventional drug clinical trials. We had the ascorbic acid clinical trials, which some of you may know. It was discussed earlier. These earlier trials, especially with Pharnex, these early trials kind of let us get insight into how difficult CMT is actually to translate a therapy because of the variability, because of the assessments that we had. They were not sufficient to really assess clinical outcomes. And what's happening now is there's a lot more clinical trials now being registered. And I feel that we're now, from 2019, we're kind of at an inflection point for CMT drug development. But what has preceded this, just like in the previous inflection point for the genetic era for CMT, was technological advancement. We now have better ways of targeting gene modification. We've better ways of being more specific and understanding the therapies to translate. So what's in the therapeutic pipeline for CMT? Well, as I said, in 2019, there was a few companies involved in CMT. Now, this is survivorship bias because some of the companies have been left off the pipeline, such as Pharnex, which has been liquidated. But now, in 2024, there's a huge increase in CMT companies. And a lot of these are based around, like I said, gene therapies, modifying PMP22 levels. There's a lot of companies based on small molecules. So I think if we were to look into the future and we think back about the previous inflection point, I think this is only the start. And there's lots of lessons to be learned as these companies translate, as many of them take shots on goal, some miss, some land. And I think it's very important, and I know Toby's going to talk on this, about lessons that can be learned from different clinical trials being set up. So there's a massive increase of around 320% in companies translating therapies. This doesn't represent now what's been done in research labs. Lots of other research has been done in academic labs, but these are companies that are looking to translate a therapy into clinical trials for CMT. So why does it matter that more companies are investing in CMT? Like I said, the more shots on goal, the more likely you are to score. And the more experience we have in setting clinical trials up, in going through and evaluating therapies, the better and more efficient that we can become at it. So the more likely that we'll have a therapy quicker. And then once one company is successful, I think that lays the path for many more companies to accelerate drug development. So again, I'm very happy that Bruce spent time talking about different parts or different therapies, but I'll try and give you a little bit of insight about what the names or the classifications of these therapies, what they entail. So small molecules, gene therapy, cell transplantation, and what I will define as cellular modulation therapies. So small molecules, actually, they're more broad-based therapies. They're looking at cellular health. They're looking at targeting an enzyme to modulate some transport system or the general energy levels in the cell or the connection between two cells. Gene therapies are much more specific, and I need to point out that should say corrected gene, not defective gene. So gene therapies, as you may have heard, they're utilizing different different vectors such as viruses or lipid vesicles, and they're transporting different gene-modifying therapies into the affected cell type, so say Schwann cells or in the peripheral nerves. And these are the most specific therapies that are coming to market, but they also have the most challenges because translating a gene into a cell type, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But I think this is the area that has the biggest possibility for benefit for patients. There's cell transplantation therapies. So essentially this is where you'll have stem cells isolated from the patient or from donors and then transformed into the specific cell type of interest and then replanted into the patient. And then there's other cellular modulation therapies where you might be looking to modulate the immune cell response, where we know that the immune system aggravates CMT. So there's lots of therapies looking at trying to modulate that, as well as other antibody therapies. So I just want to say from a patient perspective, uncertainty still remains, but the path is clearer and there's multiple avenues that are being explored for CMT. And for patients, what I'll say is to commit to making a difference. Because when I was 16, I committed to making a difference and there was no path laid out for me. I just had to commit into the darkness, into the unknown and try and find a way. So what I'll really say is commit to making a difference. Take action. That's the most important thing. Just find a way and take action. And then you'll find a way how to make a difference. And yeah, that's everything for me.